We'll now start the more technical talks of this symposium. The first talk will be given by Tony Heinz from Columbia University. It will be about the history of the maser. It will be followed with a discussion with Professor Towns from Berkeley University. And together they will recollect how the maser came to be.
Good evening. I'm very delighted and very honored to have the opportunity to participate in this special remembrance of Jim Gordon. I'm here in one capacity as an active participant in the field of lasers, and in some sense my entire professional career has been shaped by the breakthroughs that Jim and Charlie Towns made during Jim's graduate studies. But I'm also very happy to be here as a faculty member at Columbia University and one who's had the opportunity to actually walk past the laboratory where these experiments were done many times, and it is, a source of considerable pride to me. So I'll just have a few brief remarks to refresh your memory on some of these important historical steps, and then Charlie Towns will join me and make a few additional comments. So this is where the maser work was first done. It was actually on the 11th floor of the Pupin building. I've been at Columbia for about 20 years now, and it took me some period of time to determine exactly where the maser work was done, but not too many other things have changed in the building, except maybe the air conditioners weren't there at the time. But this is the location where the maser work was done in the early 50s. Now we're at a conference that is celebrating all the different applications of lasers, and I just want to remind you, of course, that historically the laser was the optical maser. So the maser is microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. And if you look at the history, it's quite apparent that that was the seminal breakthrough. I mean, once that occurred, the laser was almost an inevitability. But the maser in itself was quite a novel concept and a very important physics breakthrough. Who were the people who made it happen, who built the first laser? Well, I think you'll recognize the individual on the left, Jim Gordon. Actually, he carried on the final part of the project, but the initial phase, he was assisted by Herb Zeiger, who was a expert in molecular beams and one of Robbie's graduate students, and all under the leadership of Charles Towns. This is also a nice photograph because it's from the first major conference that initiated the field of quantum electronics and really brought a focus on this area of research. Here's a picture of a very elegant looking Jim Gordon working on the experimental apparatus with Charlie Towns. You see all the diffusion pumps and the inner workings side view of the first maser. Just to refresh your memory on what was involved, the maser in some sense was very closely related to the strong interest in molecular beam techniques. So I think all of you are familiar with lasers, but the maser, of course, operates in a different spectral region, in the microwave region. Consequently, it's a different type of feedback mechanism in cavity. But actually, the other part that's very different is the way in which population inversion is achieved. So the original maser was based on the Money inversion mode that you can see in the bottom there. But the way population inversion was created was not by optical pumping or some other type of excitation, but it was actually this very delicate process by which focusing a molecular beam would selectively place inside the cavity molecules in the excited inversion mode. So this was coupled with a high Q cavity, and the first maser, for your reference, operated at a frequency of about 24 gigahertz. The published work that heralded the demonstration of the maser is shown here. You'll notice Jim was the first author on this letter to the editor of Physical Review. It says an experimental device which can be used as a very high-resolution microwave spectrometer, microwave amplifier, or very stable oscillator has been built and operated. I wish I'd have a chance to write a paper with a beginning sentence like that. I guess you don't even need to put any references on it. This immediately had an impact on spectroscopy. So this was actually done in the regime below the lasing threshold, but the construction of this molecular beam allowed new features to be identified, hyperfine features in the inversion spectrum of ammonium, that's the ammonium molecule that's shown here. But I always enjoy reading these old papers, so that was the first sentence, and then it went on to describe the apparatus. And a little further down, because actually the first paper concentrated largely on the spectroscopy, it said if the power emitted from the beam is enough to maintain the field strength in the cavity at a sufficiently high level to induce transitions in the following beam, then self-sustained oscillations will result. Such oscillations have been produced. So that, I guess, defines the initial demonstration of the maser. Jim was very productive in graduate school. In addition to this paper, there was a remarkably comprehensive treatment of the oscillation regime and the frequency stability, which I think, as many of you know, is a subject of great controversy and fundamental discord among the physics community. But actually, the first large paper here already shows the theoretical depth that Jim had. And in fact, there's another more spectroscopy-oriented paper that appeared in which Jim was the sole author in graduate school. Now, one of the issues that perplexed a lot of the scientists at the time was how this highly monochromatic source could be compatible with the uncertainty principle. So if you considered the spontaneous emission lifetime or the cavity transit time, you would get a corresponding uncertainty in the frequency that was actually much greater than that resulted in the oscillations. But it was quite difficult to convince people, and one of the beautiful experiments that did this was actually building two masers and beating them together in a detector and then looking at the beat frequency, and that turned out to be, for an appropriate tuning of the lasers, a nice audio frequency. So this was just a beautiful demonstration of the fact that a highly stable oscillator had been created. And you see here Charlie Towns and the other students listening to the beat of two oscillators. And Jim seems to have had a more studious approach here. So I guess that's the love of music showing here. This is not the sound of a trumpet, but the beat of two masers providing this remarkable stability in laser emission. So the field really took off at that point. This shows the more complete set of pioneers, including the work done in Russia by Basov and Prokhorov, together here with Charlie Towns, Jim on the left, and Herb Zeiger. So I'm very honored to have had a chance to make a few remarks. I'd like to ask Professor Towns if he'd come up and join me. He remained not only a very appreciated thesis advisor, but a friend throughout Jim Gordon's lifetime. And I'd like Professor Towns to come up and we could have a brief discussion about his recollections of the period of time.
Glad to be here at this ceremony. I want to make a very brief comment about Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon was a very fine person and also a great scientist. He was also brave in doing research. When he worked for me as a graduate student, trying to build the first maser, the chairman of the physics department and the previous chairman both told him it would not work and he should stop because the project was wasting the department's money and his time. Both of them had Nobel Prizes, so they presumably weren't stupid physicists. But Jim proceeded with his work anyhow, in spite of what they told him. And about 4 months after they told him that it wouldn't work, it actually did. So from the maser also came the laser. Jim didn't get the Nobel Prize with me, presumably because he was a student when the maser first worked. But I think he deserved it. He went on to other important work, and we should all celebrate him and his contribution. So let's celebrate Jim Gordon. Hooray for Jim Gordon.